Hi, thanks. My name is Milko. I'm going to present to you something that I came up with a couple of years ago for a reason. No, not for a reason. It just popped into my mind, and I thought, well, can I do this? And thought about it, and I was like, yeah, I can. And then it turned out that it was pretty easy. So just before we start, the times that I've presented this talk, I've been asked afterwards the question, why would you do that? And the answer is, you wouldn't. Probably you don't want to do this in production. I did it just because I can and because I hate people. And yeah, the universe is getting even with me now, because our production server died today because there was a storm that kicked down an antenna of some sort. And then there was a bug before that in production. So yeah, but I'm still going to give you this talk. And to be more serious, got an inspiration from Pauline from the keynote about cross-pollination. So that's it. It's like we're going to do something JavaScript-like in PHP. We're going to make PHP objects behave like JavaScript objects for whatever reason. So that's it. Let's dive in. Let's see what we can do. So the goal, make PHP objects behave like JavaScript objects to an extent. So let's start with literals. We're going to see a JavaScript object, which is a literal. This is syntax that we don't really have in PHP. It would be really nice to have some way to quickly define objects, in my opinion, in PHP, but we still don't have this. Although I heard some thoughts about somebody bringing this in. So this is like the simplest thing we can do with an object in JavaScript. We can define an object. So can we do this in PHP? Well, not really. We can define an array using this short array syntax. But it's an array, not an object. But can we turn it into an object quickly? Well, yeah, we can. So we can just say it's an object, and it becomes an object. This array gets casted to an object, and yeah, there we go. We have an object. It's ugly, but still. There is another way to define an object in JavaScript. And this is to go like, well, new object, and assign some variables. We can absolutely do this in PHP, no problem. It's out of the box there. Perfectly fine. And then we can assign a function to a JavaScript object. And then we can call the function. Now, mind you a little bit about the slide. This is a very old-fashioned way to assign a function to an object. Since the creation of those slides, JavaScript added support for more fancy and more modern and more clean syntax. But I decided to keep this syntax. Why? Well, I hate people. That's the first thing, as I mentioned already. But also, this syntax actually allows us to see better what's going on under the hood. Because what the new syntax does is, literally this is what happens, but it's just a nicer way to write it. So we're going to use this old stuff here. So we can declare a function in JavaScript. In JavaScript, functions are first class citizens. And we can assign the function to a property of an object. Mind you, this is not a method. There are no methods in JavaScript. This is a function which is assigned to a property of an object. And we can do this as well in PHP, but when we call the function, fatal error. We cannot call the function. Now, a little bit of a disclaimer here. We can actually do this. We can put parentheses here, and then we can call this function, and this will work. But this is moving towards Lisp, not moving towards JavaScript, so we're not happy with this. We don't like this syntax. So can we do something about it? We'll need to introduce a class. Now, this will break the literal transliteration that we're doing, but we're going to introduce a class. We're going to call it a JS object. And this class is going to have one single method, and it's the magic call method. And what this magic, oh, come on, seriously, why are you doing this to me? Cable, I believe. And what this method is going to do is, well, let's say the magic call method, what it does, when you call a method on a class that is not accessible from the scope that you're calling it, if you have defined a magic call method, the magic call method will get called with the parameters of name here, that would be the name of the method that you're trying to access, and an RE with the arguments that you're passing to this method. So in our call, what we're going to do is we're just going to check whether we have a property assigned to this class, which is a closure. And if there is a property assigned to this class that is a closure, well, we're going to execute it. And if there's not, we're going to throw this nice exception, which I can't remember what was the exception in JavaScript exactly, but it's something similar. It's not a function something. And we're going to say, well, there is no function like this. This, by the way, behavior may get broken in PHP 8.1, if I have to be honest, unless you declare, I can't remember what, because for whatever reason, somebody decided it's not a good idea to just assign properties to objects. Whatever. Maybe we should extend from the standard class object here. Anyway, this is how we do it. And voila, we get this result. We can now call functions that we assign to our objects. And yay, one step closer to hell. Next, what else can JavaScript do for us? Well, I have this object, I have assigning to a function, and we have the argument, I'm console logging the argument, but I'm also calling this. So now we got context in JavaScript. So the big question is, okay, can we do this in PHP? Nah. Again, fatal error, like this is bad, this won't work. Why? Well, because when we call our function, it is not bound to any sort of a context. So there is no this. And this is what the fatal error tells us. Uncaught error, using this when not in object context. Can we do something about it? Yeah, of course we can. Before calling our function here, we're just going to bind it to the object that we're calling it in. So the bind to method on closures in PHP will create a closure that will execute in the context of the object. And by the way, this is a kind of a way probably that you can exploit to assign properties to private, assign values to private properties from outside of an object. You can kind of walk around this, because when you bind the closure to a object and gets executed in the context of the object, it has access to its private and protected properties as well. So yeah, you should know that. You should be evil as much as possible. And will this work after we bind it? Totally. Okay, so now by doing the, oh, and one more thing, if you notice, we're binding the function that we're calling at the time of calling. We're not binding it before that. We're not remembering that it's binded. We're binding it only when it's called. And why is this? Well, in JavaScript, if you have a function which is assigned to an object, and then you assign this function to another object, and you call it from the second object, this context will switch. It will be a different object. And this is what we get here. We get the same behavior. If we have a second object here, and we assign the O1 func to, let's say, O2, and we call O2 func, this into O2 will refer to O2. So yay, getting there, getting a bit more JavaScripty. Now, this is like basic behavior with JavaScript's objects, but we're doing PHP and we're doing object-oriented programming, and obviously we really want to do object-oriented programming in JavaScript because we're evil. And we want our objects, our JavaScript, our PHP JavaScript-like objects to be able to act as such. So let's see, let's talk about constructors. So in JavaScript, we have functions which can act as a constructor. Well, basically, the JavaScript functions which act as constructors, they're just functions. But when you call a function and say, and put the new keyword before the function, it creates an object magically. And this is what happens. So let's say we have this function CF1, that stands for constructor function 1. It's a function, but see, there is a this, a equals a, so there is a this reference in the function, although it's not part of an object. It's just a function, but still there is this. And we also have this second function here. So the point is, if you put the new keyword in front of a function, the function will be executed in the context of an object that still doesn't exist when you declare the function. And the whole thing here, it will return an object. Now, if you know just a little bit of JavaScript, this is not news for you, I'm absolutely sure. And it resembles PHP to an extent, but not really. And in this function, in this constructor function, as you see, we're creating a property, this over there, like this point A equals A. This, we create a property and we assign the property A the value of the argument A. And we create another property that holds a function. And after we instantiate this object here, we can call the function. And see, we can call a property called constructor. For this a little later. If we execute a constructor function like this, it will just get executed. No problem. You can execute this. And you can create an instance of an object, and it will also have a constructor like this. This object, it will have no properties, but if you put new in front of calling the constructor, it will create an object. It will be an empty object, but it will create an object. It will have the constructor property here. So what is this constructor property in JavaScript here? So when you create an object by using a constructor, it gets assigned a constructor property. And this constructor property points to the function that created the object. It points to the constructor. So the output here would be running constructor. As you see, we first call new CF1, running constructor. Then when we call the function on this hello world, it will go hello world. It will, when we log the constructor of O1 is, well, where did I get this? Okay, I've screwed up a little here. This will say the value of A is, where am I calling this? Oh yeah, hello world. Oh yeah, the value of A is A, yeah, because this is what I'm logging, that's right. So this whole thing here is a result of calling this function here. This function, CF1, this will be the value of the constructor. It will point to this function over there. Sorry? True, it's missing. It should say running constructor too, thanks. So output from running this constructor is missing. We should have another row here. It's running constructor too, thanks for the point, I missed this one. That's true. And if we call a new CF2 function, this will return an object. It will have a constructor, and it will point to this function here. Note that it only says function because this function is an anonymous function. So just a quick recap. If we put the new keyword in front of calling a function, this will create an object and will return an object. The function will get executed in the context of this new object. And the new object will have a property called constructor, which will be set to the function that got called when when calling it with a new with a new keyword. This totally doesn't work with PHP, of course. None of this. So we'll need to write some more code here. So we'll need to recreate this behavior and to put all of these words that I just spoke into behavior and code. We're going to introduce the Js Constructor class. Now note that the Js Constructor class extends the JS Object class. Why is that? In JavaScript, everything is an object. So if you have a function, it's an object. So this is why, to act more like JavaScript, we want our constructor functions to act as objects as well, and that's why we extend the JS object. So now when we have a JS constructor, we can assign properties to it. That's really cool. And we can assign functions to the function. That's really cool as well. And as ridiculous as it sounds, actually, if you've written enough JavaScript, it's really handy. And that's how you emulate static methods as well. But anyway. So let's look at the JS Constructor class. Well, first things first. As I said, we're not doing a transpiler, although this can be the result of a transpiler. What we're going to do is take a closure into our constructor method and take a name. It's going to be an optional thing just to emulate named functions and anonymous functions in JavaScript. We're going to store them. Now, the JS constructor, remember, constructor functions in JavaScript, they're just functions. So our JS constructor needs to be invocable because it needs to act as a constructor, as a function, sorry. So we're going to define the magic invoke method. And when our JS constructor instance gets invoked, so we try to use it as a callable, we'll just call the callable with the arguments passed to the invoked method. That's it. Pretty straightforward. We're going to add this to string here. It's really not that important, but we just want to emulate. So if we want to log the JS constructor, it will give us function, and if there is a name, it will have the name, or if it doesn't have a name, it will be just function. And unfortunately, because we cannot use the new keyword, we're going to cheat a little here, and we're going to create a method that's called new instance. And this new instance method is going to do what the constructor function does when used with the new keyword. So what we're going to do is exactly this. We're going to create a new JavaScript object. We're going to assign the constructor property of the JavaScript object that was instantiated to this. This is our constructor here. Then we're going to call the callable that we've passed, binding it to the instance that we've created, and passing in the arguments that we got here. And then we're going to return it. So basically, this is exactly what the new keyword does in JavaScript. It creates an object, it sets its constructor property to the function that is creating it. It's calling the function in the context of the object, passing the arguments that is being passed, and then returns the object. Voila, it works. It's sick. So there we go. That's the equivalent. CF1, it's an instance of a JS constructor. It's again, sorry, couldn't do the real new thing, but again, new JS constructor. We have the function passed as a callable. The callable will get executed in the context of the object, so we have this over there. This is the one that doesn't use the this whatsoever. And if we go O1, give me a new instance with 5, then we get an object that has this function defined over there. And if we call the constructor, we'll get function CF1. Then again, I have missed the output, sorry. Come on, don't be like that. All right, So yeah, if we call this, it's a callable. Remember, it's an invocable object. So there will be output here that I've missed. It will say running constructor 2. And of course, we can instantiate and see that the constructor would be with no name here. So nice, nice. We're getting there. We have constructors. So, of course, we need inheritance. And in JavaScript, inheritance is not like PHP's inheritance. Because you see, JavaScript doesn't have classes, although there is this class keyword, and there are classes in ES6. The classes in ES6 is basically just sugar candy. Sugar candy? No, not sugar candy. Sorry? Sugar coating, yes, exactly. Sugar coating over what we're describing here. So that's why I ditched the lag. I was like, yeah, I won't deal with the classes. This is more clear. A class in JavaScript ES6 would do exactly this kind of stuff, with the exception that you can, if you have declared a class, you cannot actually call the class. This will throw, this will throw an error, because the classes, they are not functions. Like, their constructors cannot be called outside of a new context, which is like, why? But okay. So, inheritance. We have this simple object here. In JavaScript, we have this so-called prototype-based inheritance. What the prototype-based inheritance does is basically it works like this. Each object may have a prototype. The prototype of the object, if it exists, will be manifested as a value of this property here, called __proto__proto. Now, this is quite frankly deprecated, and you have a couple of methods to access this, but this is a bit more clear, so this is the way we're going. It's the same stuff. The difference is that they're deprecating the direct access to the property. They're adding accessor methods to this property, so it's all the same stuff. So if you have an object in JavaScript, and this object has a prototype, and you try to access something on this object, and it's not there, it will try accessing the same thing on its prototype. And if it's there, it will return whatever the thing is from the prototype. But if the prototype doesn't have it, guess what's happening? Well, the prototype checks its prototype. And if its prototype doesn't have it, goes along, you get the picture. So if we do this, like we have this proto object with a property A, context, function, and we have property object with another property called context. And we assign the proto object as a prototype of this object. And we access the property A, it's going to be 5. Like, we're accessing it on this object. This object doesn't have property A, but its prototype has. So we get 5 here. God, I've really mixed up the output of this. Like, what the hell did I do? This is protocol today. Yeah. Oh yeah, actually, this is correct. What am I looking at? Thanks again. If we call the function will print context is, and it will print this context, but we have overridden this context here. It will say C2, because context, the property context, it exists in both objects, and it exists on the object, so this is what we're going to use. If the property context didn't exist on the object, it would fall back to the prototype. It will be C1. But we overrode it, so this is what we get. A fun consequence of that is that during runtime, you can actually switch the prototype. And then you get an object that inherits another object. So at line 1, our object inherits object A, but at line 5, we may have switched the prototype, and our object will inherit now object B. So that's like that's super evil. I haven't seen anybody do it like in the JavaScript world. It's a really bad behavior, it's a really bad thing to do, but you can. And also this kind of inheritance allows you to easily inherit from multiple objects. Because if you have two objects, you can just combine their properties, getting a third object, and making this the prototype of something. So, yeah, JavaScript is nice. Now, we'll need to add this behavior in our JavaScript library, in this small thing that we're doing, because obviously this wouldn't work. Like, why would it? Can we do it? Absolutely. How? Using a bit more magic methods. So, I've outlined some steps here. Yep. First, we're going to have this public proto function. It's going to hold nothing in the beginning. Mind you that in JavaScript, this function, the proto property will always hold something, but if we try to do this in PHP, we'll just get an endless loop, so I'm not instantiating it. It's going to be empty. I'm going to cheat a little. And here's what we're going to do. We're also going to define a magic get method on our JS object class. Now, the magic get method, what does it do? Like, if you try to access a property on a PHP object, and this property is not accessible from the context that you are trying to access it from, so that's either it's not defined on the object or is protected or private, then the magic get method gets code with the name of the property. So what we're going to check is, is our prototype instance of JS object? This will blow up because I didn't write is set, but you get the picture. We check whether we have a prototype set and whether it's an instance of JS object. And if it is, we pass on to the prototype and return whatever there is. And the prototype, because it's an instance of JS object, if it doesn't have the property, we'll do the same thing. And if there's nothing, we just return nothing, because this is what JavaScript would return as well. Undefined, actually. We don't have undefined in PHP. So whatever. We're evil anyway, so we're not going to be pedantically evil. And this works. Yep. One more thing about the prototypes. We have constructors. We have object prototypes in our small evil library. But we need to combine them. Because you see, in JavaScript, when you have a constructor function, and the functions have this property called prototype. And this property holds an object. Whatever you assign to this property, to this prototype object on the functions, will be used as a prototype of the constructed objects. So let's illustrate that. We have this empty constructor function, constructor1. We set its prototype. We set a fn function to its prototype. Then we create an object using the C1 constructor, and we code object fn. We get this output calling from the other side, because that's what we console log in the function. And if we console log obj proto, it will equal the C1 prototype object. It's the same object. Well, we already see how easy this is to implement. Well, obviously, we haven't implemented it again, and again, lots of errors. But to our JS Constructor class, all we do is define a prototype which is public. It's a good idea to instantiate it because we'll instantiate it somewhere, just squint a little. And what we're going to do is, when we instantiate, we're going to instantiate a new object. We're going to set the constructor to this, and we're going to now set the proto property of the new instance to this prototype. Then we're going to continue the usual way. We're going to call the function. We're going to return the instance. And now it works. And pretty much that's it. So again, why do that? I don't know, kind of, if honestly, again, no reason. I'm just like, I even managed to come up with a fictional story that was ridiculous just to have some point. It was about the EU in the 2050 regulating languages, because it's like regulating stuff, run out of things to regulate, so now we have to use PHP only in the EU, and we need to do a transpiler. All of this nonsense, but after I listened to the keynote in the beginning of the conference, like, I don't know what you can use this for at all. Like, freakishly no idea. Don't do it. Like, we have this class thing. Quite frankly, by using JavaScript more and more, I kind of get, I kind of start liking it. The only thing that I can think that can come as good as maybe just have a better idea of how this prototype crap works, because it turns out is really not very clear to people. I mean, it's really not that intuitive if you're not in JavaScript. And since they have the class keyword now, and they have classes, they don't have classes. They have nothing like classes. It's just a keyword that makes things look prettier, but it's not classes. It's the same stuff. When you use class extends, that sets a prototype. So yeah, this makes things even more hard to get, like unintuitive. So the only thing that I hope you get from this talk is this is how it actually works with JavaScript. And don't do this in PHP. It's like, don't hate people. We have enough crap on our hands, so. So that's it. That's the whole thing that has the point of just seeing whether we can do it and figuring out that yes, we can. My name is Milko Kosturkov. That's my Twitter handle. That's my LinkedIn. You can mail me. I'm not very active on Twitter. I mostly read. But if you want to get in contact with me, I answer. I mean, I read it, so it's fine. And the slides link. So that's it. Thank you very much. If you have any questions or hate, I'm here. I'll also be around. So feel free.
Yeah. Thank you. Welcome. So, are there any questions? We can still.
All right.
Everyone seems to be happy. It was easily digested. Seems that everybody's clear. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I might have a question about
sure.
the constructor property.
The what property?
Constructor property in PHP. I'm not sure I've seen how that was set. Can you please show that slide?
No, it's a property in JavaScript.
No, but in PHP when you were mimicking that.
You didn't get where we set it?
Yeah.
Okay, let's look through it. Here, when we instantiate a new object. So,
yeah. So
by the way, I actually fooled around with JavaScript instantiation debugging. This is, I believe, the order of which things happen. Because when you call the constructor function, you already have a constructor set and the prototype set, if this matters at all. But this is pretty much how it goes. I haven't read the specs, though. It's experimental data that I was working with. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so, all the way up there.
So my question is, does the code handle multiple inheritance? And if you have a chain of objects going back, does it also account for that in the solution, or is it just one layer of inheritance?
Okay, so first regarding the inheritance, you can inherit only one prototype. You can have only one prototype. But you can have this prototype be the result of mixing objects. So this way you wouldn't have multiple inheritance, but you would achieve something very similar. So you get two objects, you add them together, creating a third one, said this is prototype, and you're good to go. Regarding the second one, so you were asking about chain inheritance. I don't know. It never crossed my mind to see what would happen if we do that. So I don't know. That's a very interesting question. I'll try it out. And if I have an answer during the social, I'll be happy to give it. I haven't thought about it. It's an evil idea. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The other thing would be in JavaScript, it allows for hoisting of variables, and it will check the chain going up. That might be another thing to consider as well.
Going up, like I don't really get the.
If you have a function with a variable inside, say a equals 5, and then you had another scope above that also has a variable a equals 5.
Yep.
In JavaScript, if you didn't have the one inside the function, it will automatically check the one above, and it will continue until it goes to the global scope.
Yep.
I'm just wondering if you considered implementing something like that into the work that you've done.
No, I haven't considered it because this is more about functions and functional programming. But we kind of have this with PHP. No, we don't have this. Well, actually, we do. Do we? No, we don't. I haven't considered it, and now while considering it here, I don't know if I'd be able to do it. No, I don't think I'd be able to do it. But just as something interesting that I heard, there is an RFC in preparation for introducing multi-line short functions in PHP, and this will act exactly as described as with JavaScript. I don't know if this RFC will make it to what was it, the discussion phase? Not discussion, but yeah, the phase where the voting phase. And I don't know if it will get passed, but there is thoughts about this. And I really hope that it will pass because this is really handy. I really hate to use the use thing. It's like, but yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.